Richard Gilbert retired from the Unitarian Universalist ministry after over 40 years as parish minister. In Cleveland, Ohio, Ithaca, and Rochester, New York. He graduated with a master's degree from St. Lawrence University Theological School in 1961, from Colgate Rochester Crozier Divinity School with a doctorate in ministry in 1977, and holds honorary degrees from St. Lawrence, Starr King School for the Ministry, and Meadville Lombard Theological School. Reverend Gilbert is the author of a number of books and is currently working on one entitled No Consorting with Angels, The Spiritual Life of Susan B. Anthony. He lives in Rochester with his wife, Joyce. We begin our service by ringing a bell to bring us together. We begin with these words. As we enter this community of the Spirit, may we remember the difficult lesson that each day offers more things than we can do. Therefore, may we learn to separate that which matters most from that which matters least of all. May we do what needs to be done, postpone what does not, and be at peace with what we can be and do. And our prelude is Syrinx by Claude Debussy. The musician presenting is Cable Stanwix. Please join in the chalice lighting words shown on the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Next, we are going to sing a unison song. The words will appear on the screen. Please join us in singing We're Going to Sit at the Welcome Table. It's a traditional song that I know you all recognize. It's arranged by M.A. Walden. And our song leaders are Chris Jensen, Randy Rosette, and special guest at the piano, our own Matt Edwards. This is the time set aside in our service for sharing significant personal milestones in our lives. If we were in Community Hall, you would be invited to come forward to move a stone. Now, in our virtual reality world, if you would like to share your joy or sorrow with us, there are still several ways you can do that. These can be shared at any time on our website. We'll read first those that have been submitted over the last week. You can, at this time, type your joy or sorrow in the chat window. Please put the words "read aloud," that's "read aloud," at the beginning of your message. If you would like us to read the items submitted in the chat, Devan Riper will, in a few minutes, read the items submitted in the chat. You can instead connect privately in the chat with the Pastoral Care Associate. Look for them in the participant window with PCA before their name. Or another option is to click the blue raise hand symbol in the participant window. Our technician will unmute you and invite you to share your joy or sorrow. So are there joys or sorrow that have been submitted in advance?
I have none of those. We'll look for folks raising their hand. And I don't see any of those either. Nobody has raised their hand today.
Okay.
So are you ready for the read alouds?
Yep.
Okay, so to begin with, Arden and Marilyn Doctor from Florida both have been diagnosed with COVID, so keep them in your thoughts.
Mm.
Zachary O'Farrell says that his sorrow is the derision and the division that this country has come to in the current political climate. And Patty Joe says, our sweet boy, now a young man, will head up to Plattsburgh this Wednesday. We're proud and happy for Mateo and walking around with a big old lump in our throats. Good luck to Mateo. I don't see a read aloud in front of Paula's, so you guys might want to take a peek at that and read it in your chat box. She's got a big comment. And Elizabeth says her dear friend Diana, who is fighting metastasized adrenal cancer, is struggling to recover from surgery. She's heartbroken for her and asks that you please hold her in your thoughts and prayer. And I think that's all I see.
All right, and we're going to go back because we do have a couple of raised hands. And the first one is Paula and Steve. Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to make sure that the chat was read, and it was read beautifully, so that's all I have.
Okay. And next we have Kate Pierce. Go ahead, Kate.
Great. I just like to share a joy that my partner and I have been approved for our first apartment together, and we're moving in about a month.
Woo!
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Kate. I think that concludes the joys and sorrows for today.
For the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, let us hold all that we have heard and felt in our hearts.
Tuesday's actually Blanche's birthday. So Claire's going to be here with her 1-year-old. They're going to be, but the 1-year-old would be the Jack.
Even if virtually. I miss seeing you all, but I confess I do not miss the 8 hours of driving between destinations and speaking to you from Seneca Lake and the Finger Lakes, where the weather is balmy. And gives good occasion for this prayer of thanksgiving. So I invite you to, in the holy quiet of this hour, to get yourselves comfortable wherever you're seated and join with me in the spirit of meditation. Thanks be for these. Wisdom to know life is not a given, but a gift. To receive blessings so bounteously bestowed upon us that we might be of use. To be of use, the greatest blessing. Thanks be for these, the poor and the dispossessed, for they, like us, have their stories. Thanks be for these, for those who serve the downtrodden and advocate for and with them in the corridors of power, for they shall both be blessed. Thanks be for these, blessings that remind us of duties, abundance that cries out to be shared. Thanks be for the needy ones who maintain dignity, and the prosperous ones who know how to be of use. Thanks be for these. Let us join together then in silent meditation. Amen. The wisdom story this morning, a story for people I think of all ages, is a traditional Japanese story entitled Heaven and Hell. There is a story of a fellow who dies and finds himself in a shimmering realm. He thinks to himself, I guess I was better than I thought I was. He's approached by a glistening being who ushers him into a regal banquet hall, in which an immense table is laid out with unimaginable delicacies. He is seated at the banquet table with many others, and a choice selection of food is served to him. As he picks up his fork, someone approaches from behind and straps a thin board to the back of his arms so he cannot bend his elbows. Trying to pick up the food, he sees that he can't get it to his mouth because he cannot maneuver his stiff arms to feed himself. Looking about, he notices that all the other people around the table have their arms bound so straight they cannot bend them. All are grunting and groaning as they attempt to stuff the food into their mouths, but they cannot reach. And there is a great wailing and moaning at their predicament. Going to the being who had shown him to the place, he says, "This must be hell. But then, what is heaven?" The glistening being shows him through the archway into another huge banquet hall in which there sits another great table filled with the same array of foods. Ah, this is more like it, he thinks. And sitting down at the dinner table, he's about to dig in when someone comes and ties a board to the back of his arms. So once again, he cannot bend his elbows to feed himself. Lamenting that this is the same unworkable situation as hell, he looks about in dismay to notice that at the table there is something different occurring. Instead of people trying to force the food into their mouths, straining against the rigidity of their arms, each being is holding his arm straight out to feed the person on either side of him. Each person is feeding the person next to him. He thought, This must be heaven. The reading this morning, "We Were Made for These Times," is a letter to a young activist by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, an American poet, post-drama specialist, Jungian psychoanalyst, and author of Women Who Run with the Wolves. My friends, do not lose heart. We were made for these times. I have heard from so many recently who are deeply and properly bewildered. They are concerned about the state of affairs in our world now. Ours is a time of almost daily astonishment and often righteous rage over the latest degradations of what matters most to civilized, visionary people. You are right in your assessments. The luster and hubris some have aspired to while endorsing acts so heinous against children, elders, everyday people, the poor, the unguarded, the helpless, is breathtaking. Yet I urge you, ask you, gentle you, to please not spend your spirit dry by bewailing these difficult times. Especially, do not lose hope. Most particularly because the fact that we were made for these times. Yes, for years we have been learning, practicing, been in training for, and just waiting to meet on this exact plane of engagement. I grew up on the Great Lakes and recognize a seaworthy vessel when I see one. Regarding awakened souls, there have never been more able vessels in the waters than there are right now across the world. And they are fully provisioned and able to signal one another as never before in the history of humankind. Look out over the prow. There are millions of boats of righteous souls on the waters with you. Even though your veneers may shiver from every wave in this stormy roil, I assure you that the long timbers composing your prow and rudder come from a greater forest. That long-grained lumber is known to withstand storms, to hold together, to hold its own, and to advance regardless. In any dark time, there is a tendency to veer toward fainting over how much is wrong or unmended in our world. Do not focus on that. There is a tendency, too, to fall into being weakened by dwelling on what is outside your reach, by what cannot yet be. Do not focus there. That is spending the wind without raising the sails. We are needed. That is all we can know. And though we meet resistance, we more so will meet great souls who will hail us, love us, and guide us. And we will know them when they appear. Didn't you say you were a believer? Didn't you say you pledged to listen to a voice greater? Didn't you ask for grace? Don't you remember that to be in grace means to submit to the voice greater? Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that is within our reach. Any small, calm thing that one soul can do to help another soul, to assist some portion of this poor, suffering world, will help immensely. It is not given us to know which acts or by whom will cause the critical mass to tip toward an enduring good. What is needed for dramatic change is an accumulation of acts, adding to, adding more, continuing. We know that it does not take everyone on earth to bring justice and peace, but only a small, determined group who will not give up during the first, second, or 100th gale. One of the most calming and powerful actions you can do to intervene in a stormy world is to stand up and show your soul. Soul on deck shines like gold in dark times. The light of the soul throws sparks, can send up flares, builds signal fires, causes proper matters to catch fire. To display the lantern of soul in shadowy times like these, to be fierce and to show mercy toward others, both are acts of immense bravery and greatest necessity. Struggling souls catch light from other souls who are fully lit and willing to show it. If you would help to calm the tumult, this is one of the strongest things you can do. There will always be times when you feel discouraged. I too have felt despair many times in my life. But do not keep a chair for it. I will not entertain it. It is not allowed to sit to eat from my plate. The reason is this. In my uttermost bones I know something, as do you. It is that there can be no despair when you remember why you came to earth, who you serve, and who sent you here. The good words we say and the good deeds we do are not ours. They are the words and deeds of the one who brought us here. In that spirit, I hope you will write this on your wall. When a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe. There can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for. Here ends the morning reading.
An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. But another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous donation by way of one of the options shown on this slide. You can click on the tiny URL, which you can see at the top of your screen, and in the chat window to donate. Or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide show you how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose or the intent of your gift.
Do you remember science class in high school or perhaps in college? Your untutored student eye pressed close against the eyepiece of the microscope. You looked into whatever it was and you were amazed, astounded at the detail you saw. In bold relief were cells invisible to the naked eye, but suddenly clear to your unstudied mind. Now, while medical researchers peer through their laboratory microscopes seeking a vaccine, we peer through our moral microscopes seeking the ethical meaning of COVID-19. The perfect storm of the COVID-19 pandemic, economic collapse, and racial unrest has brought into bold relief dimensions of American culture that were already there. Flaws that were intellectual instead became visceral, and we were emotionally, even spiritually engaged. And while we bemoan the storm, it does provide a unique opportunity for a clarification of our national values and our religious perspective. And so I invite you to enter the lab to focus on a moral microscope on the USA today using a Unitarian Universalist filter. On the brink of a critical national election, we must muster courage to see what is at stake in Pew Pulpit and Politics 2020. In doing so, I suspect we will come to the conclusion that politics is a spiritual practice in both pulpit and pew. What have we learned? We have learned that government represents the better angels of our nature. While we are quick to blame our belated and pathetic response to the pandemic on our befuddled president, we, the people, are also responsible. How? We allowed an inexcusably underfunded public health establishment. In our obsession with privatization, we neglected basic health care, especially for the marginalized. You must remember Grover Norquist's famous image. I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub. This starve the beast philosophy has failed us. As has been said, when you drown the government in the bathtub, people die. A single-payer national health system, contentious here, is standard operating procedure in other industrialized democracies. And while touting our health care as the best in the world, we ought to note that it actually ranks well below these nations on virtually every indicator. This American exceptionalism is one of the toxic amoebas we discover by looking through our moral microscope. What accounts for our healthcare failure? In my opinion, good old American individualism. Don't tread on me. The Lone Ranger mentality that was evident as we, quote, tamed the wilderness, now has become cemented in those whose interest does not go beyond their own noses. One writer expressed his sadness in hearing people equate going unmasked with human rights and imagine war against authoritarianism. You have probably heard these cries, these brave cries for freedom, as if wearing a mask is not to protect not only yourself, but your neighbor, as if this were a fundamental violation of freedom ordained by deity. Freedom from is on steroids in many parts of the country. People flaunt suggestions and directives to wear masks and socially distance themselves in the name of freedom. They don't quite understand freedom for, a positive civic freedom that applies a responsibility for one's neighbor. Some Christian leaders have promoted a Golden Rule 2020, inviting Americans to abide by this biblical maxim during this election year. The Reverend Paula Jones, the so-called Trump whisperer and presidential confidant, said when Trump announced his re-election bid, "Let every demonic network who has aligned itself against the purpose, against the calling of President Trump, let it be broken. Let it be torn down in the name of Jesus." Unquote. That's not the Jesus I studied in my Universalist Sunday school class. The Golden Rule 2020 initiative is off to an inauspicious start. Then we have learned that normalization just won't work. Our democracy needs more than mere incremental reform. It needs radical reform in race relations, in voting, in dealing with global climate change, and much, much more. Restoring normalcy is just not enough. The normal, as we have known it, has been riddled with injustice and danger. Take the so-called unrepresentativeness of our government. While we properly laud our nation's founders, many of them Unitarians, but essentially all white men of means, they had a conservative bias. Result? we now have a tyranny of the minority. Each state, no matter how small, gets 2 senators. Idaho and New York both have 2. The Electoral College tends to divide states into red and blue, and one may win the popular vote and lose. Just ask Al Gore and Hillary Clinton. Are we a nation of real, live, breathing individuals, or a nation made up of states, which are arbitrary political entities? Our preamble to the Constitution begins with, "We the people of the United States," not "we the states of the United States." For example, Democrats got 45 million Senate votes in 2018. Republicans got 33 million. Guess who rules the Senate with an iron hand? Large majorities back progressive policies, but are continually frustrated by this structure. No wonder many are disillusioned by our democracy. This subversion of democracy also includes suppression of voters, particularly minority voters, gerrymandering, and the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision, which gives those with the most money the biggest political voice. Trump is right. The last election was rigged, and this one will be too, unless we wake up. This undermining of democracy also includes Trump's attack on the U.S. Postal Service to discourage and disparage mail voting. Many of us will seek to vote by mail instead of risking our health by voting in person. There is already a movement, I learned yesterday, of people who say they're going to vote in person anyway, just to take no chances. And that is to say nothing of the inexcusable and inexplicable foreshortening of the U.S. Census by a month, especially since it is being conducted in the onerous circumstances of the era of COVID-19. Minority voters and urban areas are likely to be undercounted yet again. Every day seems to bring another blow to this great democratic experiment of ours. Philosopher Kostika Brataton, writing on why democracies fail, put it this way: genuine democracy is difficult to achieve, and once achieved, fragile. In the grand scheme of human events, it is the exception, not the rule. Who in his right mind would choose the dull responsibilities of democracy over the instant gratification a demagogue will provide? And we have learned dramatically of the injustice of America's original sin, racism. Why did it take the public murder of George Floyd to fill the streets with protest? That evil cannot be dealt with by saying there are a few bad apples who must be either retrained or weeded out. There is, we have to admit, a systemic racism in America which permeates virtually every area of our society. In 1964, I did a graduate school study of housing discrimination in Chicago. I learned that residential segregation is not accidental, but the deliberate policy of the federal and state governments. I personally experienced this redlining pattern when a realtor member of the Universalist Church of Oak Park, Illinois, warned about us renting a house in certain racially mixed areas. Nevertheless, we settled on a neighborhood in Maywood next to a black family, which had a cross burned on their lawn. 1964. Then what to my wondering eyes should appear last week but a contemporary study of institutional racism today? The tax burden levied upon homeowners was greater on black families than white ones. Racial segregation is no accident of history, but a deliberate policy of white America that began in 1619 when slaves were brought to these shores. And I thought going to the March on Washington in 1963 or to Selma in 1965 would bring about the racial justice millennium. I was sincere, but naive. We have learned many painful lessons in our laboratory by moral microscope gazing. Perhaps the lesson closest to home is our sense of entitlement. I know not all Unitarian Universalists are upper middle class, that some are poor, some merely middle class, and even a very few are rich. What struck me, however, as I peered through our UU filter, was that while many of us assail the very rich, it is to the top 20% of Americans that we should also be looking. As good parents, many of us have created a glass floor below which we will not allow our beloved offspring to fall. Legacy admissions, preferential treatment of investment income, housing mortgage deductions, college saving plans, and exclusionary zoning all help support the class-based society in which we live. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer, yesterday and today. This is the so-called principle of cumulative advantage, which lead to what has also been called the hoarding of the American dream. As one observer strongly put it, dinging the top 1% won't cut it. They are a lot richer, but a lot fewer in number. Upper middle class folks will have to vote to tax themselves, should I say ourselves, to level the playing field for all children, and that will be hard. Just look at the struggle in New York for our foundation aid. While it is designed for educational fairness, it has been totally inadequate to provide the sound education that our state constitution requires for all children. This observer goes on, members of the upper middle class like to think of themselves as middle class. They love to think of themselves as hard workers who played fair and won what they deserved, rather than as people who were born on third and think they hit a triple. They hate to hear that the government policies they support as sensible might be torching social mobility and entrenching an elite. That elite is them. And that elite may even be us. We may have to think about what theologian Jürgen Moltmann called a theology of relinquishment, challenging our inherent social advantages. Furthermore, we may have to engage in what he calls an ethic of class betrayal, advocating for policies which are aligned against our economic self-interest. And this will be hard. The point of this moral microscope gazing is that if we learn nothing else from this pandemic, it is that our nation is suffused in structural injustice from sea to shining sea. We do not take public health seriously. We have no real concept of educational equity. We have scant understanding of how economic disparity destroys community. There is in our land a moral myopia, close to blindness. Many of us have tried to speak truth to power with decidedly mixed results. Many of us are aging out. We long to pass the torch to a new generation of activists who are moved by the Spirit. I live in the hope that others might gaze into that moral microscope and resolve to find not only a vaccine, but the moral courage to continue the struggle for beloved community. It sounds like a formidable task, and it is. To change into society into some version of beloved community will involve, first of all, a change in us. We will have to become moral microscope gazers who will not only invite others to look, but will actually have to address the inherent injustice in our nation that we see there. I'm encouraged, however, just by looking at the August calendar. You'll note that August 18th, this Tuesday, is the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the Women's Suffrage Amendment. As you learned earlier, I'm working on a book about the spiritual life of Susan B. Anthony, No Consorting with Angels. I'm trying to discover what made her tick over a long lifetime of activism and agitation. She died in 1906, 14 years before the 19th Amendment was ratified. All that incredible commitment required a kind of spiritual adrenaline that did not dissipate with defeat, but provided decades of resilience. And we have to remember that protest delivered the 19th Amendment. The amendment, ratified almost exactly a century ago, is often described as having given women the right to vote. It wasn't a gift. It was a hard-won victory achieved after more than 70 years of suffragist agitation. President Woodrow Wilson, a Southern Democrat patrician with no interest in the issue, tolerated demonstrations until suffragists compared him with the Kaiser in World War I. His patience ran out. In June, picketers were arrested en masse. There were hunger strikes. There was forced feeding. Nevertheless, the protesters persisted and won. We are not asked to go to such lengths, but thus far our efforts, while noble, fall far short of what is needed. I think of Greta Thunberg, that 16-year-old Swedish environmentalist, speaking to Democratic senators some months ago. I know you're trying, but just not hard enough. Sorry. You may remember that the fifth principle of our association is to affirm the right of conscience and the democratic process. Seems to me the problems I have mentioned all are individual religious issues. And so I believe that politics, the work of democracy, is a fundamental religious value, and that participating actively in that process is spiritual work to which we are all called again and again. Politics is a spiritual practice. Democracy is a never-ending conversation, and we need to be a part of it in the public square. Democracy is a marathon through mud, not a sprint on a groomed track. It is not something we have. It is something we do religiously. As Clarissa Esther writes in her letter to a young activist, when a great ship is in harbor and moored, it is safe. There can be no doubt. But that is not what great ships are built for. And that is not what a liberal religious faith is for. Let's sail. Amen.
We will sing a unison song. The words will appear on the screen. Please join us now in singing We'll Build the Land by McDade and Zanotti. And it's arranged by Angie Brandt. Our song leaders are once again Randy Rosette and Chris Jensen. As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words that will show on the screen. We extinguish this chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Active hope is not wishful thinking. Active hope is not waiting to be rescued by the Lone Ranger or by some savior. Active hope is waking up to the beauty of life on whose behalf we can act. We belong to this world. The web of life is calling us forth at this time. We've come a long way and we are here to play our part. With active hope, we realize that there are adventures in store, strengths to discover, and comrades to link arms with. Active hope is a readiness to engage. Active hope is a readiness to discover the strengths in ourselves and in others. A readiness to discover the reasons for hope and the occasions for love. A readiness to discover the size and strength of our hearts, our quickness of mind, our steadiness of purpose, our own authority, our love for life, the liveliness of our curiosity, the unsuspected deep well of patience and diligence, the keenness of our senses, our capacity to lead. None of these can be discovered in an armchair or without risk. Amen.
Our thanks today to our ushers, Kathy Harris, Chuck Manning, Amy Jameson, and Dawn Dana. Our pastoral care associate on duty today is Dean Van Riper, and our welcomer, Elizabeth Barbarian. Our musicians today are Randy Rosette, Cable Stanwicks, Chris Jensen, and Matt Edwards. Office support by Sapphire Korea, tech support by Chris Jensen, and the summer service coordinator, Randy Rosette. We also have a couple of announcements, two of which were submitted to us during the week, and one I believe that we will have in person. Our first announcement is this, brought to you by the UU Weekend Committee. In these humid summer days, look forward to crisp fall weather and gorgeous foliage at the UU Weekend at Silver Bay on Lake George, October 16th through 18th. The Weekend Committee and the staff at Silver Bay are working hard to make sure everyone will be safe and will have fun. Many planned workshops and events are being moved to larger spaces so social distancing can be practiced. Kids will have lots of space to run outdoors, and there will be fun indoors as well. There'll be plenty of activities. Read more details in Windows Weekly and sign up soon. I think with all the social distancing we've had to do and all of the online events that we have to do without seeing each other, I think this is going to be a very welcome change. Our second announcement is from the Green Sanctuary Committee. It's time to recycling corks, personal care items that are not otherwise recyclable in single stream, used Brita filters, toothpaste tubes, and toothbrushes, and used ballpoint pens. These items can be left in a plastic container under the steps at the address listed in our Windows Weekly. It is not necessary for you to call before you drop off items. Let's get restarted in our attempt to control waste. And I believe we have at least one live announcement from Karen Kaufman.
Good morning, everyone. I thought this was going to be read, so I don't remember exactly the wording, but I want to report, first of all, that the UU The Vote postcarding campaign is taking off almost like wildfire. We've distributed already 4,000 postcards that are going to voters of color in states that are experiencing voter suppression. It's a very, very effective campaign. I have great faith in the organization that we're partnering with. And we are ready to launch round 3 very shortly. And if you would like to join, I'm leaving my contact info in the chat. You can look me up also in the directory for my phone number and give me a call. Thanks.
Al, did you see my notice? My question?
No, it hadn't appeared on the screen.
Okay, I put it into the chat and didn't to you. It's Carol Butt. We had a wonderful grab and go distribution yesterday, and I just want to thank everybody who put their contributions into the grab and go and the people who participated. It was very delightful to see so many people come and take the very full bags. We had a lot of good food for them. So thank you, everybody.
Excellent. Anything else?